Welcome to a conversation with a community leader. This program is sponsored by Leadership Kitsap, which our guest today has been a member of. I'm Cary Bozeman, your host, and I'm the former mayor of Bremerton and the former mayor of Bellevue, way back there. And I'm currently a Port of Bremerton commissioner. So today we have a very special guest. Our guest is John Gese. Now I want to make sure I'm pronouncing that right, John. Did I get it?
Yes, Gese.
Gese. What kind of name is that?
I think it's French or German, maybe. Sometimes I spell it Gese. That's the way my family spells it. Sometimes I've seen it Giese. So different variations.
Well, John, it's good to have you here today. I haven't interviewed the sheriff before, so it's great. And I know a lot of people in our audience are going to be interested in what you have to say today. Before we get to that, though, I always like you to introduce yourself to the audience. Where are you from? What brought you here? And what got you into police work?
Well, first off, I was born in Seattle and raised in Seattle. I graduated from Lincoln High School in Seattle. After graduating high school, I went up to Western Washington University and graduated with a degree in sociology. And as I went through college, most of my interest was to either become probably a police officer or social worker. And when I graduated from college in 1983, I applied for both jobs, but they're pretty hard to actually get back then. And so I went into the insurance business, and I worked in insurance as an underwriter for several national corporations for about 10 years, and then ended up in Arizona through that. And then I came back, wanted to get back to the Seattle area, and that's when I gave it another try to get into police work. And I applied around, and I took a test for Kitsap County Sheriff's Office in 1991. And and came on board then. And so I just passed the 30-year mark. And, to be honest with you, when I took the job over here, I thought, I'm going to probably work here for a couple of years and then go back to Seattle. And but I met a girl, and I fell in love with the community, and we got married. We raised our son here in Port Orchard, and I've had a wonderful career here at the sheriff's office, and been part of a wonderful community.
And it continues.
It does.
I know how I feel about moving from Seattle and coming over here and not thinking at the time you were going to be able to get away from the big city, but it's hard to leave Kitsap. It's just such a beautiful place to live, and the quality of life here is good. And I've been here 25 years now. I never thought I'd do that. John, you're kind of an interesting position right now in your professional career. You have been appointed by the county commission as the new sheriff. What brought that about? And tell us a little bit about what that means. I assume you have to run for sheriff at some point.
Yes. So Gary Simpson, our former sheriff, he retired after 37 years of service in June, and he had been sheriff for 7 years, and he elected to retire a little bit early in his term. And so he retired, like I said, June 30th. So I had been the undersheriff for the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office, the number 2 person for 6 years. And so when the appointment process opened up, I applied and was ultimately appointed by the Board of County Commissioners on August 9th. And then I took my oath of office as the sheriff on August 30th, and that's when I became the official sheriff. So that would have made me sheriff for the rest of Gary Simpson's term, which ends here this year in 2022. So there'll be an election this year to determine who will be the sheriff for the next 4 years.
Yeah. Well, they found a guy with a lot of experience, and I know I worked with you. You were on the board of Leadership Kitsap, and you were president of the board, I think, at one time. You did a great job. So anyway, good. So let's talk about the department a little bit. How big is it? How many officers do you have? What's your budget?
Sure. So we have about 200, well, we actually have 270 employee budgeted positions. Currently, interestingly enough, we have about 25 of those open. So we are in a constant hiring cycle right now. But of the 270 employees, it breaks down to about 130 of them are deputies. That goes from the brand new deputy all the way up to me. We have about 100 in our corrections division. That includes officers, sergeants, lieutenants, and one chief. And then we have about 40 support staff. So it's a pretty big department actually by police standards. And then as far as budget, the 2022 budget, it's coming in right at $46 million. And that breaks down to the jail being about $20 million of that. And then our patrol, detective, administrative part, it makes up the rest.
That's a big budget, a lot of responsibility, a lot of people. You don't have police officers that are on the street, right? They're not walking on the street or anything like that. Everybody, all your people are in a car, right?
Right. Yeah. And our jurisdiction, and sometimes people don't know this, our jurisdiction is all of unincorporated Kitsap counties. So we have Kingston and Hansville and Seabeck and Olalla, and Silverdale is by far the biggest urban area, but we have a lot of East Bremerton and East Port Orchard. So yeah, all of our folks are dispatched in cars and work out of, if they're a patrol division, they work out of cars.
Is it one person to a car usually?
Yes.
Yeah. I assume you have working agreements with the cities also, right?
And we're all there to help each other out. So if the city needs the sheriff's office to help them with anything within the cities, we're there. And and we, the nice thing I like about the local law enforcement is there's not a lot of us, and we all do work together. So we all work together on training and responding to calls and dealing with issues.
So if I'm a patrolman in the sheriff, what do you call patrolmen? You call them patrol. They're not sheriffs. They're patrol officers.
Yeah, a patrol deputy. Mm-hmm.
Patrol deputy. Okay. And if I'm a patrol deputy in a car, what are my main responsibilities?
For the most part, you respond to 911 calls, and we have, last year I think we had about 85,000 calls for service.
Was that more than the year before?
Yes, slightly. So 2020 was an odd year just because of COVID and everything else, but it was definitely a little bit more in 2020. So
what's the breakdown of those calls? What are most of them for?
Oh, it could really vary. We get calls from nuisance calls, like trespass calls or malicious mischief calls, to burglary calls. We're seeing a lot of auto theft calls these days. It really runs the gamut, and I think that's one of the things about being a patrol deputy or an officer. You don't know exactly what's going to come out on the radio at any given day or time. And so it could be something mundane like a neighbor dispute over a property line to armed robbery at Walmart. Let's
just pick out homeless. You get calls about that, and what do you do about it? Don't get me wrong, I'm very sympathetic to this issue, and I know we got to solve this problem. What do you do? What do you do in that case?
Well, if we get calls, and for the most part, we don't deal with most of the homeless folks. We don't even see them. I think it's really the unsheltered homeless that maybe you're committing minor crimes like trespass or theft, or just doing odd things that people wonder, and either they wonder about the welfare of them, or they wonder if there's mental health or addiction issues that need to be addressed. So we do respond out to those, and if there's crimes, then we try to follow up and see what we can do as far as identifying who committed the crime, the trespasses, and if we run into people that have a mental health or a medical problem that's serious enough, we try to get them into services or call aid or any of the other options we have. So
you get a lot of domestic violence calls?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a difficult situation. How are your officers trained to handle that?
A couple basic things is, they go to all of them. If there's a call of a verbal dispute, but don't necessarily know what's going on, our deputies will respond. We feel that's something very important, that we make sure that we follow up on these calls. So once they get there, the first option is to make sure everybody's safe. And then they have to investigate whether there's been any crime, any assault occurred. Worry about the victim's safety. If there's children involved, we worry about the children and are they safe? And in the state of Washington, there's a mandatory arrest law. So if we find out there's been a domestic assault, we're mandated to make that arrest. And so that does happen quite a bit.
John, you've been in the police work a long time. What do you say today that are the biggest challenges we face in your business that maybe we didn't face 20 years ago?
Really, and we're not the only one, and I think we're not the only profession, but our biggest challenge right now is staffing. When I came in the late 90s, or early 90s, they were hiring tons of people, tons of police officers, because a lot of police officers have been hired during the Vietnam War and just after were retiring. And so that precipitated a wave of new hires. Plus, you saw a lot more police officers being added to the streets in the 90s. Well, that wave of hires are all hitting the 25, 30-year mark. And so there's just a mass retirement that's occurring. People are, leaving the profession. And we knew that was coming. I think what you're also seeing now too, in addition to that, is just the normal retirements, is you're seeing some people leave the profession. They're finding it's a hard profession, especially right now. And that's true in a corrections officer field or the patrol deputy field. So, and like a lot of professions, like I said, we're all trying to find good quality candidates to fill our positions. And so just trying to keep fully staffed with the budgeted positions has been a struggle.
Seattle's lost 400 officers in the last couple of years. Are those people looking for jobs in other locations? You get any people coming from other departments that just want to get out of Seattle or get out of wherever they're at?
Sometimes we have not picked up anybody who's leaving Seattle. I think one of the things is Seattle pays very, very well. And so people leaving Seattle are probably looking for a pay that might be as well. So we've had some apply, I believe, but we haven't hired any as of yet.
If I'm a high school senior and I'm thinking about being a police officer, what should I think about doing in terms of further education? Is there something you look for before you even start interviewing these people?
Well, they have to be 21. So, if we're looking at, and sometimes we do hire people 21, 22. If they have college, we certainly look at that. We don't have a college requirement, but it is, I think, a benefit to have college education. But we also look at work experience, and when you're talking about somebody that young, we're also looking at maturity level and what they've done. For us, some of the qualities we look for is, is there a history of volunteerism, working in the community, working with diverse communities. That's an important one for us. So there's some different things we look at. If you wanted to, first off, I would say anybody who's interested in law enforcement right now is probably, you could pick no better time.
What's the starting wage for a new officer?
For us, it's right around $80,000 a year.
And there's good benefits, health, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, good environment. Mm-hmm.
I know that most government agencies, and they should be, are looking at how to become more diversified in their workforce, having more women as patrol officers, more people of color, that sort of thing. Talk a little bit about your efforts to diversify.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, we have our workforce in the jail and our workforce in patrol looks a little different. Just by the nature of having a jail, we have to have a more balanced male-female employee population. So when you look at our jail, it's actually much, well, at least as diverse as our community, as far as minorities and not. We could use more females in the jail, but there actually are about 30% of the folks who work in the jail are female. In patrol, I think one area we're trying to focus on is hiring more females. We have, I believe it's about 10%, but we'd like to see that number raise up. And, as far as diversity, one thing I'm pretty proud of is the last couple of years, we're seeing a really good diversity of folks applying for our law enforcement patrol jobs. Good. And yeah, so it is good. And, because I think that's important for us. We definitely want to have a workforce that, people in our community says, looks like, something that would look like in the community.
Let's talk about the jail. None of the cities, the 4 cities in our county, have their own jail. So they all contract with the county for your services. What is the jail? I mean, how many jails do we have? How long do people stay in these jails? That sort of thing.
In the state of Washington, you find a lot of the counties are responsible for managing a county jail. And that is, those are meant to house people who have misdemeanor crimes that generally, if they are, required to go to jail, it's a year or under. Those are the facilities where people might be held pre-trial while their case is being set up. And
So no one stays in the jail more than a year?
they shouldn't. Every now and then there's some exceptions if they're awaiting trial for a long period of time. But yeah, and then we have a state prison system, and those are meant to house folks that are sentenced to jail over a year.
How many cells do you have in the jail?
Well, I'm not quite sure how many cells, but we have a facility and it's kind of broken down to different areas. There's dorm type settings where there's just bunk beds and they may house, 30 or 40 people. Then we have, some units that have maybe 2 people to a unit. And then we have some that just have 1 unit or 1 person to a unit.
So at any one time, how many people might you have in the county jail?
Pre-COVID, we were running right around 450, 480, which was very high. That's really at capacity for us.
Wow.
Yeah, with COVID, we knocked that down to about 150 at the lowest, and now it's stabilized right around 300.
What kind of relationship, John, does the sheriff's department have with the shipyard?
Well, we coordinate on some issues. What's interesting about Kitsap County is you have 2 Indian tribes here in the county that have different, they have their own sovereignty. And then you have, I think it's 4 military bases. So there's some overlap in investigating crimes on military bases. Sometimes we deal with and help with threat issues and other security issues, but we work with them and they work with us.
Does the same thing apply to the tribes who I think they're kind of on sovereign property? Do you have a relationship with the tribes?
Mm-hmm. We do, and I think it's a good one. We've worked with Suquamish tribe. I've been here 30 years, and I think that our relationship now is very good, especially with the Suquamish Police Department. Certainly, they have their sovereignty, but there's some, especially federal crimes that are handled by the police and the sheriff's office, and for non-native people living on the reservations, that if they commit crime, that generally falls under our purview. So
if you go out and arrest a Navy personnel, maybe they've stolen something in a store or something like that, and you get a call, you just take them to the police in the shipyard?
If we encounter them off the facility, they would probably be booked into our jail and then released to the military.
Oh, they would. Well, we've got a long history in this community of dealing with the shipyard and personnel in the shipyard, so we must know what we're doing most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure the Navy's good to work with. We're seeing more, John. I can't turn on the television without seeing somebody where somebody's taken a gun and gone into a shopping center and started shooting people. Every night, every place, it's just awful. What's the answer to that? Why are we seeing so much of that in our country today?
It's hard to explain. When I reflect on my 30-year career, I can't say that I've ever experienced a time where so much is going on, whether it be COVID, whether it be the political environment in our country. Our crime rates all peaked in the 1990s, and then for actually decades they were slowly lowering, and now I think there's some concern about violent crime rising. And when I started my career, you really didn't think about anybody coming into a school or especially not a student and shooting people. I mean, and
Right.
as police officers in law enforcement, what's been interesting is over the years things happen, and are we prepared as police officers to deal with that? And that was something we weren't prepared to deal with. And after 9/11, it's like, well, you prepared to deal with terrorism? It's like, well, I guess we'll have to be prepared. But I think one of the things I'm hearing, and we're waiting for some year-end crime numbers, but I'm hearing from our officers on the street, they are running into people who are armed more often. And this last year we saw, I can think of 3 incidents off the top of my head where we had young people that ended up shooting at each other, and one ended up in a murder. And so I mean, it's hard to explain, and I'm sure there's a lot of factors that play into that. But
Yeah, it must be a lot more training for these kind of situations because it's like in King County, you turn on the local news, Channel 5, and it's almost every night you'll see a shooting.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's just a difficult time in our country and in our world right now with that kind of thing. It's so scary. What kind of relationship, John, do you guys have with the school? Uh, the schools.
I would say good. We work closely with the schools. We have 4 school resource officers that are assigned to various schools. That includes one up in the north end. Actually, I guess maybe it's 5. So, because I believe we have 3 in the central school district and then 1 down south. And, for us, the school resource officers are a good avenue to work closely with the schools. Those are officers who really are understanding the school environment. They're there to help build relationships with the children. And schools tend to be a big consumer, or at least they ask us to respond a lot to help with problems. And the resource officers aren't there to get involved in school policies, but they are there to help with any issues that might come up as far as children who commit crimes or accused of committing crimes, or if there's some welfare issue that's concerned the child's, there's a welfare issue at home. I think the other thing that many of the school districts perceive is they're worried about the safety of their kids on campus too. And I think having an officer on campus gives a sense of security.
I think that's, as a parent, I would really want to make sure that there was a security officer in the school. And that's it's a shame, but it's true. Hey, John, I had more questions than I have time, but this is a program about leaders in our community, of which you are one. How would you describe your leadership style? You're leading a big bunch of people.
Well, I guess I would describe it as I've always felt that I was a person that values communication. And we speak about Leadership Kitsap. You were on the board, I'm on the board. This program is sponsored by it, and I really identify with some of the tenets that they really promote. Education, listening, collaboration, and I think that's the style that I hope I have. And we're dealing in a world where everything seems to be a lot more complex than it ever was. And as I go out and talk to people, I mean, our communities, they have different needs, they have different wants. There's different ideas about how to solve problems, and I've tried to take the approach that I'm interested in listening to everybody and trying to work with people. And right now, as a law enforcement agency, it's imperative that we work with our communities, and that's really a goal for me too. And and also a leader that hopes to develop their organization and agency and is responsible to the community, especially in my position, and just try to set the best example I can. And to be honest with you, I have a wonderful group of people working here at the sheriff's office, and I'm extraordinarily lucky. And one thing you'll hear me say, and I hope you hear all of our folks here say, is we're extraordinarily lucky to be here in Kitsap County. We have a wonderful community, and it's extraordinarily supportive of our agency, and we appreciate that. We don't want to ever jeopardize that. So
I agree. John, I've led a few organizations in my day, and I always, what I've found out is surround yourself with really good people and listen to what they have to tell you. So I think you're on the right track. And I served on the board when you were our board president, John, and you were very good because you were an excellent listener. You got people to work together. And so I think that's a strong strength of yours. I admire anybody in your business. John, it's not an easy business, especially today, but it's one that the public needs. It's one we feel better about it when we see that police officer going down the street. And you guys are important to our community. So I want to thank you, John, for coming on the show. I want to wish you a happy new year and appreciate everything you do for the community. So it's good seeing you. Thanks for being a leader in our community.
Thank you very much, Cary.
You're welcome. So with that, we will we'll have a new leader in our next show next time. I want to wish everybody a happy new year, and we'll see you next time on a conversation with another community leader. Thank you.
Leadership Kitsap is our community's civic leadership program. Leadership Kitsap fosters and empowers educated, prepared, and engaged community leaders. For over 25 years, we have cultivated leaders that work collaboratively to create positive change, dedicated to making our community a better place to work and live. We expose our class to Kitsap's leaders across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. We're happy to bring many of the conversations with these leaders to you. Strong leaders build strong communities.